how do we embrace each other for who we are, what
Mhm.
our gifts are, and to be in constant communication with each other such that we don't feel like maybe one is doing more than the other. It's like we're doing an equal amount of work, we're putting an equal amount of effort, it just looks differently.
All right, Wellness Ninjas, welcome back to another episode of the Wellness Dojo podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craig, and excited to have our guest today. Excited to introduce you. She's a certified life and business coach, priding herself in being a people connector. Excited to welcome in Cynthia Chau-Hoang. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Kyle.
I'm excited to dive in today, to pick your brain a little bit and just have some fun. And I thought we'd maybe, since you and I actually don't even know each other that well yet, I thought we'd start with some fun questions, get to know you a little bit.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so just a couple really fun ones. First of all, put you on the spot, top movie of all time.
Ooh, Expendables. The first
Expendables.
one.
Interesting. Why the Expendables? Why do you like that one?
Uh, I love action movies. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, except if I were a guy, I would like to be able to build my body in a way where it's like, no one wants to mess with you. So, and then of course, again, action, right? Like something people don't know about me now is that I used to watch a lot of horror movies,
Mm.
and after having kids, I just don't have the want to watch horror movies. Yet I'm okay with guns and shooting and just action movies because it's exciting, it's not real.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Okay. Okay, good top movie. Expendables is a good one. Top book of all time that you've read.
Oh, The Alchemist.
I love that book. So good. Why The Alchemist?
I just really love the journey. And we hear this, it sounds a bit cliche, like, oh, it's all about the journey, enjoy the process, all that kind of stuff. Yet for me, I just loved reading through whatever like that character was going through, the thoughts that was running through his head. And at the very end, it was like this crazy twist. And it's like, whoa, it's a 2x4. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it now. So it's really neat.
Yeah, it's interesting through that book how he's like so so blind in many ways, but at the same time so open to everything, right? Like, yeah, it is a really cool book. That's one that I should go back and reread again because I think it's one of those books where it's kind of like The Matrix, which would be like my movie of all time, probably. It's like every time you go back to it, I think you get a new nugget, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we got top movie, we got top book. One more question for you. If you could have dinner with any one person, for any length of time, unlimited time, dead or alive, who would you have dinner with?
Wow, that is a great question. For some reason, Denzel Washington comes to mind.
Interesting.
I don't know why. I've never been asked that question, and I don't know why he just popped in my head. I'm a true believer of don't overthink things.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
something comes to mind, then yeah, I think I've always just loved hearing the way he speaks, whether it's, he's in the movies, I know he's portraying a character, yet watching some of his other interviews and just the wisdom that comes with his speech, the tones, the inflections of the voice, the pauses, like it really causes me to think. So I think I'd love to sit down and chat and have dinner with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that he would be somebody who'd be just super insightful, somebody who has a lot of wisdom and experience probably. And I same thing. Anytime I've heard him do an interview or anything, you kind of get that feeling like not only does he sound like he's very intelligent, but he also just seems like very down to earth and just authentic and real, I think, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Fun questions are over. Let's get down to business.
All right.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm born and raised here in Calgary. I am a weird, not a weird species. I'm a rare species. A lot of Calgarians tend to move around and search for opportunities elsewhere. Yet, I love growing up here because of the people. And who would have known? Now I'm in the coaching industry. I help run and operate Certified Flourishing Coach, which is a coaching company that's global as well. We're all around the world. And then we're under the umbrella of Wellness Innovate, where we really work with workplaces because we truly also believe, and I believe as well, that we can change the world by changing the workplace. Like we are at work at least 8 hours a day, anyone who's working full time, minimum 8 hours a day. So if someone is in a environment that isn't healthy, it can actually affect them at home. And I can say that because I've been there before. And it's not fun. And I grew up with the phrase that always spread across the workplace was, leave your home life at home. When you're at work, just focus on work. Yet that's just not how things are. We're the common denominator in both places and all places. So that's what I do for work. And then also, I am also, like as you mentioned, a life and business sales coach as well. So I support businesses not just in the mental health and leadership aspect, also helping to scale their business in such a way that they can expand and be sustainable as well.
Yeah. It's funny because, just going back to the first thing that you said about being born and raised in Calgary, being that rare breed, it's hilarious because I always say the same thing. I was also born and raised in Calgary, never left and stuff. And I always say like it's rare, it's such a rare breed and stuff, but I keep now running into other people and meeting other people who are also born and raised in Calgary. So maybe we're less rare than we thought.
I think so. We'll see. I haven't kept a tally sheet, so
Yeah,
you see
that's right.
it,
That's
don't
right.
you?
But always cool to meet somebody else and talk with somebody else who was born and raised here, right? Because the city has changed so much. And you know, with coaching and with relationship building, working in workplaces or working one-on-one with people, it's just so fun to meet different types of people and different types of relationships. And that's something that I really want to touch on today, which is how do we build healthy relationships and how do we actually like keep the right relationships around us is something that I would really like to get into today.
For sure. Let's do it.
So, before we like really get deep into the relationships and stuff, like how did you, because I know from talking to you before that this is something that you're also passionate about. How did that passion start to come up for you in terms of just like the importance of the right relationships?
Yeah, I'd say it all started when I was in school. I was known as the nerd, the geek, big glasses, a little bit awkward, very quiet. And I was always the observer. And where I started to notice was in junior high, where I wasn't in a specific clique or group of people, yet I would float around and embrace and enjoy the company of different types of people with different personalities, people with different interests. And that went into high school. So in high school, nothing against jocks or anything. I just never hung out with jocks. It was just something that was not on my radar. Yeah, I would hang out with all these other groups of friends, from friends who were from international places to those who had disabilities to the single moms, because the high school I went to was the only high school at the time, I'm not sure about now, except it was the only high school in town that would serve and cater single moms who were teenagers. And so
Hmm.
I found myself in a place where I realized that I love hearing people's stories and to learn how not to judge them for it. Yet also, and with that, I heard a lot of victim stories as well. So, and that can be emotionally draining, especially when I was going through my own stuff and then hearing their victim stories and knowing what I know now. I think it really set me up to win of how to support people in relationships now, how to really hear what they're saying and hear what they're not saying.
Hmm.
And part of my purpose in life is to just help people break those glass ceilings and to step out of the victim of whatever story and experience they came from, and to step into a place of empowerment and inspiration such that they can live a full life and not having to carry around this baggage with them all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean that's one of the things that I love as well about the work that I do is just you get to know people, but you get to understand that, like you said, everybody has a story, right? And everybody has a messy story, and everybody has a fascinating story. And if we take the time to listen and understand, it really does start to create and help those relationships really flourish, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, what are some of the biggest things that you see in terms of relationships when you're working? Let's just start with in the workplace. Like within the workplace, when you're helping coach people with business or just with their career paths, what are some of the biggest things that you're seeing pop up with relationships?
I find people are nervous and fearful to step out and just be themselves.
Mm,
I feel like a lot of people I speak to, including myself, sometimes it's like when we step into a room full of people, it's like, who am I? Like, where do I fit in? Will someone appreciate what I'm sharing? And so I find a lot of times you could definitely tell either people's confidence levels or maybe how they're stepping out of their comfort zone when they are in a room full of people or when they come into the office, whether they're saying hi to people or if they're that quiet, silent type that just sits there, observes, or maybe, observes and then steps out afterwards, right? So I find with workplaces and anybody in the business world, it's finding out where we fit, because this world definitely is not a one size fits all, because we all have different passions, we have different gifts, talents, abilities, and definitely a different purpose as well.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting concept of like figuring out where we fit in with a group because the common language right now would probably be more around the lines of like, it doesn't matter, just be yourself, and you can fit in anywhere that you go and that type of thing. So it's an interesting kind of conflicting argument, almost, for lack of a better term, or conflicting ideologies of like, do we do we find kind of that group that's for us, or do we make our own group, or do we just like force ourselves in and just be ourselves? Because I think we've all seen particular people in our lives who are like they're like that kind of outsider, or they're like super loud and outspoken. It's like they just don't seem to fit into that crowd. But you also don't want to be like, well, don't be yourself because you don't fit in here. Where's the balance there?
I think it's to create an environment where people can be themselves differently, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. It's just like I tell my kids, they're like, who do you love more? I'm like, I love you both differently because you're both two different people. I cannot love you the same. And it's just like even with our team here, with what we're doing, it took us a while to figure out how we fit in with our differences, not
Mm,
just in beliefs and how we do things as a person. Because, like you mentioned, I have a team member who's out there, she's outgoing, she's like the people person, she's really out there. And there's me, I'm the kind of person in behind the desk doing the tech, very quiet, yet really enjoy people watching and just observing. And also with our styles of how we complete tasks, like she's great at vision, she's great at having a vision and gathering people. And yet for me, I can have a vision, yet gathering could be a struggle for me because I'm such an introvert when I don't need to be on and out there working. Yet for me, where my strengths is in the administration, executing, getting all the fine details in order. So it's about how do we be ourselves, yet also fit into a team that is very inclusive to all different personality and competencies, I guess, if that makes sense.
yeah, it kind of sounds like everybody has a role, right? Everybody has their own personality. Everybody is their unique self. And in terms of like a team specifically, I think it's like important that like everybody has a role. Like this person, like you said, like maybe you have the role of being kind of more behind the desk and maybe not as much like in the face of the people and stuff like that. But that suits you well and that keeps that engine running. Whereas other people might be a little bit more outgoing, a little bit more, with the people and that type of thing. And that also keeps the engine running.
Yeah, so definitely. And when it comes to relationships in a workplace like that, it's how do we embrace each other for who we are, what
Mhm.
our gifts are, and to be in constant communication with each other such that we don't feel like maybe one is doing more than the other. It's like we're doing an equal amount of work, we're putting an equal amount of effort. It just looks differently.
Yeah, very cool. And I think so important for people to understand as well is like there is that fine balance in terms of, it's again talking specifically in terms of a workplace. There is that fine balance of, sometimes maybe you shouldn't be the same person you are at home as you are at work and that type of thing, but it doesn't mean you can't still kind of have your unique personality there and stuff like that with a team. I think something that kind of overlaps across all relationships, whether it's, a relationship with a spouse, a relationship with a friend, or a coworker at work, I think there are kind of overlapping and overarching qualities that are important to just building healthy relationships in general. Can you speak to what you think some of those might be?
For sure. Boundaries is a big thing.
Mm,
I haven't read this book yet. It's been recommended to me. It's called Boundaries. I don't remember who it's by. I'm sure I will read it one of these days. Yet really through experience, it is boundaries. Like how do I communicate what my capabilities are at this moment? Because we all know life happens and life can throw us curveballs. And I could be functioning at a super high level, getting things done like consistently at a high speed, yet with excellence and efficiency. Yet if there's a curveball thrown my way and I'm not able to function at that high level, how do I communicate that to my team? Right? How do I communicate that to my family such that, look, I cannot fulfill this task right now or by this deadline, or I'm not able to drive the kids to Aikido class right now because I just got all these things. It's how do we communicate in a healthy way that where our restrictions are at that moment,
mm,
right? And then also when things are back up and running and everything's kind of calmed down a bit, how do I communicate that, hey, I've expanded my boundary a little bit now. My capacity has expanded a little bit more now because that situation's been dealt with. So it's learning how to say no to certain things, learning how to say no to certain people and events.
yeah,
I think that's the thing is people pleasing is real, like wanting to please everybody and not setting boundaries. And then guess what? I'm not the only one who suffers. It also creates a wedge between myself and the other parties within that situation. So,
yeah. Yeah, you mentioned communication with boundaries, and I think that's such a key because I think there are boundaries that don't need to be communicated, but then there are times when boundaries do need to be communicated. How can we better communicate with people? Whether it be a coworker or whether it be like a personal relationship, like a friend or a family member, how have you learned to properly communicate when there's boundaries that either need to be put in place or boundaries that maybe aren't being respected by yourself or by somebody else in your life?
well, what I found works, because my husband and I have been working on our communication, especially the past year, through our marriage. We had some challenges, and I thought everything was going fine. Until he told me it wasn't going fine. And I was like,
Mm,
oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me? And it was for him, and I'm sure he's okay for me to share this in a general aspect, is that he didn't want to hurt my feelings. He didn't
yeah,
want me to go to a place of self-sabotage and thinking all these negative self-thoughts about myself. So instead, he chose to just keep it to himself. And so when it comes to communication, it's how do I set the time, which is what I found works, is set a time aside with the person that I want to speak to, right? And say, look, I just want to speak to you about something that's been on my heart. It was about a situation that happened. Can we just book a time and just talk about it. And I know it sounds funny, oh, let's book a time to have a conversation. Yet I find that sets both parties up to win, to prepare for the conversation. It could be, okay, Monday's meeting, I know we had a little spiff. Yeah, I really want to talk and clear it out with you. Or it could be, I know you want to talk about budgeting, and let's set this time aside such that everybody knows, okay, I am coming to the table emotionally prepared, should I choose to have this conversation, versus something happens and right there on the spot, hey, that's not right. What you did there, you hurt me. You did this. You made me feel. And so, first off, that can cause someone like myself or anybody to just go, whoa, and step back and say, I don't want to have anything to do with you right now, because there's no safety.
Mhm.
Versus if we schedule it, we both know the expectations. That's step number one. Number two is, when having an intentional conversation, is choosing one party to go first to speak and one party to just mainly listen. And it's a very difficult practice to actually fulfill. Yet, as there's repetition of these intentional, meaningful conversations, it gets easier to be able to be in full listen mode, full understanding, whether I agree with the person or not. And then, third thing is to come from a place of I felt hurt when I heard you say this. And when you did this, I felt this way. Because for me, I truly believe no one can ever tell anyone they're wrong for how they feel. Maybe it's not rational. Maybe how they were feeling was not really whatever was going on in the situation. Yet, how they felt are valid. How I feel is valid. And then that opens up a space of, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that by me saying this way, that it triggered you, that you didn't feel good about yourself, and I didn't mean it that way. So it opens up that doorway for two people to just say, or a few parties to say, oh, okay, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the boundaries for having those healthy conversations and to keep those relationships intact.
Yeah, it's so important. Like you mentioned, like not to be the one like finger pointing, right? Like you did this, you did that. And oh man, I know sometimes the listening side of things can be really tough. Like I'm the type, I always want to be like giving my insights. It's like the coach in me as well. I'm like, I want to be giving my insights. I'm like, this is what I think. Like maybe, but even as a coach, like especially as a coach, I had to really learn to listen more and not try to save the situation. Right. And I think so often we get in situations where we want to, or the other party wants to save it and fix it. And you're so right. It's such a learned skill to just like sit, listen, absorb it, and maybe even ask more questions so you can listen deeper even with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And during the listening process, it's literally about parking the thoughts aside,
Mm,
or else I'm not truly there with the other person. And for me, because I retain information so much better through writing, I'll let the person know a lot of times, like, I'm not able to put everything in my mind. So I'll be looking at you when you're speaking at me, except if there's something, like, I'd be writing it down because that's how I care. I don't want it to just go in one ear and out the other. I want to
yeah.
truly receive the information and reflect through them together.
It's so interesting because I'm that way too. We're like, I even when I'm asking questions on a podcast like this, sometimes like I have like all these thoughts of like, oh, this is a good follow-up question. Oh, I want to dive into that. And then by the time the person's done talking, I'm like, oh, I should have written that down, right? Because it's gone. But I do it with my wife all the time too, and it's super frustrating for her. 'Cause she's like, "Did you even hear me?" I'm like, "I promise, I was listening. I just like lost my train of thought with all these other ideas over here."
Yeah.
Um, it sounds really, really similar to what I suggest with couples who are struggling with like supporting each other with fitness, nutrition, lifestyle goals, where, you can't approach it in a place of like, you're not supporting me. You are making it harder on me because you keep bringing the chips out and like a lot of this finger pointing type stuff. It's so much more effective to ask them questions like, what do you think about this? Like, what do you think about my goals? And, and then to make them feel valued in that process as well, I think is really important. And I imagine would be important, with really specific boundaries as well of, you know, it's really important for you to be a part of this process because, right?
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and that's the thing, is to be able to be open to being transparent. A
Mm,
lot of times I find it's a feeling that's easier to hide, to not be transparent, except when we're honest with each other, there's a healing that can take place, right?
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then boundaries take on a lot of different shapes and sizes too, right? Like another form of boundaries is, sometimes you have to set boundaries on specific people. Like maybe there's somebody who's um maybe not the best person for you to be around right now, right? Or somebody who's constantly complaining or constantly negative. How do people start to recognize that a little bit more in order to build healthier relationships into their life?
Well, it's definitely do what I do, just imagine a force field before
Mm,
I'm around that person. I imagine and I put up a force field around myself. And then I could feel there'll be a sensor, my imaginary sensor, where it's all inside here, where if I feel like my force field is starting to fall apart, I say, like, I gotta go, I got 2 more minutes. And really, actually, if I'm about to have a conversation with someone, for lack of a better word, I feel it's toxic
mm,
to me and my mindset and my health and all that, I let them know, well, hey, I only have 5 minutes right now. And so, what would you like to talk about? Right. And literally, and then when it's about the 2 minute mark, okay, hey, so sorry, I only got 2 minutes left. And some of those, it could be respectful, because then I'm not just jumping on a call with someone and they think they're going to go and talk at me for 5 hours. Yet I give them a time frame. Look, this is the only time I have right now. Yet I care enough about you that I want to see what's going on. And then that way we set our boundaries, I set my boundaries, and the other person feels respected and knows what to expect.
yeah. And like we've all set boundaries on people in our lives, I think, before or tried to. I'm curious, what you see with people because you're working with lots of people and I'm sure relationships come up all the time. And I'm curious if you come across it as well, and I'm sure you do, where people are trying to set boundaries with people in their lives, but there are certain people who really struggle when boundaries are put up and they fight harder to get past those boundaries, right? Have you experienced that first of all? And can you speak to that experience a little bit?
Oh, for sure. It happens all the time. And there's there's really no easy way out of it. It's really about being consistent with the expectations, being consistent. And the thing is, if it's someone, let's say a family member that one cares about, or maybe it's the like, I mean, of course, we all care about our family, yet if it's one family member that has built a habit over years and decades of breaking boundaries, and now I'm telling them, no, I'm setting these boundaries, whether it's a full verbal agreement or it's like indirect of, hey, I only got 10 minutes now, be totally ready to expect pushback. Well, I'm
Mhm.
busy too. You think I got lots of time, or whatever is going to come out of it, right? Because it's like, hey, I've set this here, this mat for you, and now you're on it. And now for a decade, I've been allowing this to happen. All of a sudden, I'm going to pull this rug out from under you. Well, something's going to happen, right? So it's being consistent with it. And as the boundaries are being pushed, just kindly push back in a kind way, as kind as possible. There's times, am I perfect? No. There's times I'm like, I'm not talking to you right now. I am done. I need to go. I'm going to hang up now, because I don't really want to hang up on people. Yeah, I'm like, I cannot do this. I got to hang up. And I hang up, right? Am I saying there's a right or wrong way? Probably not. Yet, be as kind as possible and talk about communication. If I'm going to hang up on someone, I'm going to let them know I'm going to hang up right now. Just
Yeah.
it's still, I mean, I don't know if it'll make things better. At least they know I've told them, whether they heard me or not, that I've done
Yeah.
my due diligence. I'm hanging up now.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that there's a time and a place for like firm boundaries like that, right? Where it's like, hey, I've given you every chance to, to respect this boundary. And like I've had times in my life where I've had to say like, okay, this boundary's not being respected anymore. Yeah, I'm moving from limiting to eliminating, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what I need right now. And I think it's so important that we recognize that like if there's a situation that's not making you your best self, if it's like it's your responsibility to improve that situation. Because let's say I have a friend, for example, and boundaries are being, just continually, I haven't set them firmly, or vice versa, or they're pressing past it. Well, now it's creating tension. Now the friendship isn't what it should be or what it could be. And so by like continuing to not let those boundaries do what they're supposed to do, it's actually fracturing the friendship further now. Whereas like if you get to a point where you just have to set that firm boundary, you're better for yourself. And maybe if there's an opportunity to go back to that relationship, then maybe you're going to be better for it and the relationship's going to be better for it, I think.
Yeah, and based on experience with the relationship with mine, where there was a lot of pushback, a lot of just weird things throughout the process, is that now I find there's actually more respect for me because expectations were clear, expectations were followed, and now there's a mutual respect versus before when I didn't set the expectations of I what is good for me and what's not, they would just blab off whatever, and then I'm stressed out and then I blame them versus why am I blaming them when I didn't even tell them what my expectations are of how
Yeah.
I want to be treated, right? So we actually teach people how to treat us. And so for people are like, oh, this and that, well, have you talked to the person? Have you had open, honest communication? If you had, great. If you and keep working at it. If you haven't, then maybe give that a go because complaining about it isn't going to work and it's just going to create just worse energy.
Yeah. And avoidance too, right? Like avoidance does the same thing. If you just continue to avoid it, and you're like, it'll get better. It probably won't. Like, I think there's a level of ownership that we all have to take with our boundaries. Whereas, like, again, a lot of times it's finger pointing. It's like this person's not treating me right. This person's taking advantage of me. This person's this. It's like, yeah, but who is in charge of the boundary that's there? Right? It's like it's you. So you kind of do have to take ownership of it and just watch for things, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing with personal responsibility is a lot of people don't want to give that a go, don't want to put it on for a day because it feels like it's a big beat up session, right? Whenever we mess up on something or except personal responsibility is empowering because it gives me a feeling of and understanding that I am in control.
Yeah.
Am in control of what uh allow what I'm allowing in my space and who I'm allowing to speak into my life, right?
Yeah.
Not just not just anything and anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned like empowerment, right? I think that's bang on because it's like when you do start to take control of those things and take ownership and responsibility for your own personal boundaries, you do. It's an empowering feeling because now you make room for the right relationships, right? There's a song, I can't remember the name of it right now, but at the end of the song it says something along the lines of if you never get rid of the wrong friends, you'll never make room for the right friends.
Mm.
And that was just to me, it was so powerful because it's like, yeah, like if we don't start to kind of weed out the relationships that aren't helping us pursue what we want out of life, then we're never going to make room for the right people because we've all seen what communities are. Like you guys have an amazing community where you guys are at, and it's because everybody's welcoming, but everybody's like-minded in a way. Even though you guys are all unique in your own personal attributes and you guys are like-minded in the way that it's inclusive, it's inviting, it's collaborative, right? And that welcomes more of that in. Whereas if it's a very exclusive kind of like club membership type of feel somewhere, then it's like people are like scared to come in, or people feel like, I probably wouldn't fit in there, so I'm not going to. I think it's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I talk to a lot of clients and even with myself, it's not about completely ditching the friends that you have that you feel don't serve you right now. And many of us, if you haven't heard of this, you will now. Except many of us in the personal development arena, we've heard of the circles of influence, right? The
Mhm.
circle of friendships. So the inner circle are the few that I am hand choosing. Who am I allowed to speak into my life in any situation? Because I fully trust them. I feel safe with them. And then also like where I could truly be myself and be fully authentic. And then there's the one circle bigger, which are the friends, where I'll probably share information with them, not super intimate ones, yet we still hang out and we do things together. We enjoy each other's companies, like-minded, all that stuff. And then there's the outer circle, which is the acquaintances. These are the people perhaps where it's like I just know them from somewhere. I don't hang out with them yet. They could be on my Facebook. Maybe I've run into them once or twice at a conference. Yet a lot of times it's sifting and sorting and figuring out those relationships. So there's people in my life or that were in my life years ago who were in maybe my inner circle or my middle circle. They're actually now in my outer circle of acquaintances because I still care for them as a person. If they ever came to me, for sure I'd be there for them. Yet they're not the people allowed to speak into my life. And it could be for various reasons.
Mhm.
And so it's taking a look at who are we allowing in? Because in that inner circle, it's so super important. It's like having a little guard at the door, like you shall not pass, or okay, open up the door, you can come in.
You come
Right?
in today.
Important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought up the circle of influence. Like, I think that's so powerful because I've felt it before in my life where I feel so guilty setting that boundary, right? Like, it feels so wrong for it to continue, but then I feel so guilty putting up that wall or putting up that boundary. I think even just looking at it from a circle of influence perspective of like, I've got my tight circle, I've got my bigger circle, I've got my bigger circle, and I've got my like giant circle. And you belong out in this giant circle. You're not gone. I didn't say goodbye or anything like that, but I'm just leaving you out here for now because it's what I personally need. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not like we even have to verbalize it that way.
Yeah.
Right. It sometimes it just naturally happens. It's
Yeah.
like all of a sudden, as I'm moving forward in my dreams, tapping into my values and really focusing on what I want to do and limiting my distractions, the people will automatically flow into whichever space that they're supposed to be in my life. And for example, like Abe, what's some of my close friends, Jillian, Amy, and those guys, like I never knew they would be in my inner circle now. I'm gonna share my age now that I'm 42. I know I don't look it yet. Now that I'm 42, years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago, I never realized I would have these people in my inner circle. And I tell my kids all the time, especially when they're having struggles at school with friendships, relationships. I said, don't take it too personal. Everybody's figuring themselves out. I'm 42 and I don't have myself completely figured out. Yet I'm just a little bit further ahead. And
Mm.
so just to let them know that the friendships now, you may or may not have them years later, because there's always going to be that inflow and outflow of people that come and go based on where we all are in that season of life.
Yeah. I remember that being one of the scariest things about high school. It's like all the teachers were like, "Hey, most of the friends that you have now, like they're trying to prepare you, right? Most of the friends you have now will not be your friends like throughout high school and stuff." And we're like, "What? We're gonna lose all our friends?" But it's so true. Like high school is a big kind of filtering process of that for a lot of people too, where it's like you got your everybody seems to be so tight during like elementary and junior high, and then high school comes in, it's like all of a sudden like all the cliques, like you said, like the jocks and the nerds and all these different cliques that start to come in. It's really difficult, right? I want to touch on something you kind of talked about, like the communication side of those boundaries. I want to go back to that a little bit because my wife and I recently were talking about boundaries in our life as well. And what I had said, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, and please push back if you don't agree with me here. But I said, I don't think that all boundaries need to be communicated. but it's when those boundaries require validation. So like, let's say I'm setting up a boundary with you of, um, you know, Cynthia, you gotta stop calling me every day. Right? You gotta stop calling me every day. I'm busy. Like I just can't take a phone call 3 times a day from you anymore. Like just it can't happen. Like I could either not communicate that and just not answer my phone and hope that you get the hint. Or if you feel that you need validation from that, right? You're either very persistent or you're expressing that your feelings are hurt because I'm not answering the phone. Then this communication, now there needs communication needs to come in because we need to find a way to kind of validate that boundary in a way that's mutual. Curious your thoughts on that.
I feel all boundaries should be communicated. The
Okay,
reason
good.
is because it can cause a lot of awkwardness the next time you see the person.
Mm,
And
yeah,
it could sound a little selfish. Like I don't want to feel awkward. Like I really don't. And it's weird and it's just gross. It's like if I'm calling you 3 times a day minimum, and then like in the middle of the night or whatever, and I'm leaving voicemails and why aren't you answering my phone? And you don't tell me and you don't respond. Number one, I might think something like happened to you. Like, are you okay? Like, are you still alive? Did something happen? So I start to worry a little bit. And then also, let's say I see you at a party and you're having a fun, you're having a time of your life, and we see each other, then what? Like, what are you
yeah.
gonna say to me when I'm like, Kyle, I've been calling you. I had this like really awesome like opportunity and I've been calling because I think you're the perfect person for it. You like this deal will close you thousands of dollars. Why didn't you answer the phone? And you're like, what would go through your head?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad you gave me some pushback on that because I do think that I think that it's a struggle that a lot of relationships in specific have of like when do I commute a boundary? How do I communicate this boundary? Like it's a much more difficult thing I think than just like black and white of like yes I need to tell you about this, but it's like but when do I tell you about this and finding the right time. Um yeah, I think it's pretty complex.
It can be, and it takes a lot of practice because I've experienced it myself.
Yeah.
And it's just taking like, okay, so if I need to set a boundary, I got to make sure I'm in the right frame of mind. I make sure I'm not hungry, so halt. I'm not hungry, I'm not angry, I'm not feeling lonely, and I'm not tired.
Mm,
I got to fulfill all those things, get my sleep, make sure I'm fed, make sure I have some, great people, energy vibe around me, and all that stuff, that I'm in a good space. And then I speak to the person about the boundary. And then I answer their call. And then I walk up to their office and say, hey, I didn't feel good when this happened. Can we talk about it? Right? Because if I'm in a growth space and I go to set the boundary, I'm not going to be very respectful to the other person. And no matter what the other person is doing or how they're being, they still, I would say, deserve some form of respect.
mm,
So I always make sure I'm in a good space before I go to set boundaries with people and communicate it for sure.
yeah. Yeah, interesting. And I appreciate the pushback on that. I think it's important to have those types of conversations, right? With people and going back to the or keeping in the circle of influence, I'm curious what kind of red flags you look for with people. Those kind of gut feelings, those red flags that pop up where you're like, hey, this person maybe needs to be moved to one of my outer circles. What are some of the things that we should look for in that, in your opinion?
This is this is a very broad question because it depends on what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So for me, definitely if I feel like the other person is
Mm,
wanting to control who I hang out with, how I spend my time, how I spend my money. And that's a tricky one too. It depends on the money thing, because if I'm out there just randomly buying things because I want shopping therapy, yet I'm racking up my credit card bill and I'm getting myself in debt, then that's a different form of communication if someone's wanting to control your money. So that's a different topic overall in general. Except any form of control where you feel like you don't have your free will to be who you are, or be around the people that you care about and love. And I've been in a relationship with that before. I dated a guy and didn't last very long because he wanted to control that. He's
Mm.
like, oh, why are you hanging out with this person? Oh, you got to hang with me all the time, and blah blah blah. And I was like, holy mackerel, like red flag, coming from a background where there was different complex situations. I knew that was not something I wanted to get into. I want to hang out with my friends. I want to go shopping. I want to go watch movies. Like, I don't need you to tell me who I can and cannot see and do what I cannot do and all that. And so that's one flag. Another one is definitely a lot of touchy feely. If I've communicated like I don't like this
Mm.
and they continue to do it, that's like, look, I think we should really take a break from each other right now because the boundaries I've shared are not being respected.
Yeah.
Another one is that gut feeling,
Yeah. Yeah.
intuition.
I was gonna ask. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people, some people might disagree a little bit. It's like, oh, follow your heart. Your heart can actually lead you to very interesting places that you might not want to be, because the heart space can be very emotional.
Hmm.
So I find the head and the heart has got to be aligned. Yet where that happens also is the intuition, where for me, I'm a person of faith. I have a very strong spiritual gift called the spirit discernment of spirits, the intention of people. So it's not like I'm going around judging people. Oh, you're good, you're bad. Nope, you're good. I'm gonna hang out with you. And nope, nope, yep, yep. Right. It's as I spend time with people, I get to know what are their intentions. Are they for good? Are they for their own gain? Are they wanting to create a win-win with our relationship? Or is it going to be a lose-win and vice versa? So when we spell gut backwards, it's that little tug. Never ignore it. I find for myself, every time I ignore that intuition of like, Sin, something's not right here. Maybe you should slow down and observe or research a little bit or take it slow. Every time I ignore that little small, still voice, that little tug, things have usually gone bad or gone sideways. And when I do listen and I kind of recalibrate and observe and I shift and however I feel would be if good, for lack of a better word, everything works out the way that's ideal for everybody. Whether
Yeah.
it be relationship, um, we cut ties, or maybe it's setting a healthy boundary and expectation, or maybe I just end up closer to the person because we're able to clarify what we're looking for out of the relationship or friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like a big kind of overlapping theme with a lot of those red flags and gut feelings is the other person's receptiveness to your boundaries, right? Take a standard relationship, like a romantic relationship, as an example of, maybe it's been communicated once, it's been communicated twice, maybe even a third time. And then it comes to a point where it's like, okay, firm boundaries need to be set here. We need to take some time. We need to break up, divorce, whatever the case might be. It's like boundaries have continued to not be received the way that they need to be. And it sounds like that then becomes the time where it's like, okay, this person needs to move a little bit further outside of that circle of influence.
For sure. And I would say and add to that is, especially when it comes to marriage, don't be so quick to get a divorce unless of course either party is being physically, mentally, emotionally, abused in that way where it's life or death. Like, I definitely want to stress that huge, right? If you need to leave for the safety like of your own life and your children's life, do so and get support. Don't do it alone. Yet if it's like in a marriage where there's no, domestic violence or anything like that, yet it's disagreements and grievances and just feel like there's lack of alignment, um, go get support, get some coaching, get some therapy. I know there's a lot of hoops and barriers. Sometimes it's finances, right? I think sessions could be $200, and some people, if they have coverage, only cover 3 or 4 sessions. Like, do what it takes, budget to work on your marriage, because at least if it doesn't work out and it ends up in divorce, both parties have done their due diligence. And again, like marriage counseling therapy, it's got to be both parties all in,
Mm.
not just this person's in a little bit, this person's given 100%, this one's like, we'll see how it goes. No, it's if you really want to do it, go all in. Then if it doesn't work, you've done your due diligence. And what's the win in this? What's the gain? That it all works out and you communicate better than before, you understand each other better, and you're at a total different level in your relationship, right? And I was sharing this, and you probably heard this before, like you can literally go to the registry and get a marriage license. Just pay a small fee and you get this marriage certificate, right? Sign a couple pieces of paper. Yet to drive a car, like now it's like total probation time for learners. Yeah, that's legitimate. I don't want people to just randomly be on the street, which there
Yeah.
still are right now. That's a total different topic. Learn how to yield and learn how to merge. They're two different things. Yeah, in a marriage, like what if people put in as much effort as they do to get a driver's license?
Mm. Yeah.
So many kids' lives, so many adults' lives would be transformed in such a great way.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. I mean, my wife and I got married very young, and I know that firsthand that, there's so much to learn about it, and there's so much that you're not anticipating with each other and with yourself even. It's a journey. It really is. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I mean, there's a lot that we talked about in this episode so far. Just so much gold and so much more that we could talk about, but I want to be respectful of your time. Um, is there anything at this point that you were hoping to say that you haven't given the opportunity to yet?
I think yeah, you're right. We covered a lot of ground, yet I would always, one thing I want to add is always be curious.
Mm, love that.
Always be curious to find out what the other person is experiencing. Because our behaviors can relay that there's something else going on underneath. I actually had a coaching session with Abe earlier this morning, and it really helped reset my thinking on, again, and it's not just children, it's adults. If someone is not truly being themselves, there's something underneath that behavior. It could be a sadness, could be pain, especially anger. The root of anger is literally sadness. So it's an unfulfilled need that is just underneath the surface, and without care, it just explodes, right? So it's like, I think just with relationships of boundaries, just be open and curious. And we may or may not like the answer we hear, except at least if we seek to understand first, that'll make all the difference.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. I thank you so much for being a part of it today and sharing some of your expertise and knowledge around the subject.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kyle. And I love what you're doing with the Wellness Dojo. Keep it up, and blessings.
Thank you. I appreciate it and reciprocate it. And thank you to everybody who's listening or watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, Wellness Ninjas, for joining us on another episode. A really good conversation today with Cynthia. Very important, talking about how to create healthy relationships, respecting boundaries, and utilizing that circle of influence in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and comment. That engagement really helps us grow our audience. Also, if you're listening to this episode anywhere that you listen, please take a screenshot, share it on social media, tag us. You can find us on Instagram at Wellness Dojo YYC, at Wellness Dojo Podcast, or by searching The Wellness Dojo or The Wellness Dojo Podcast on all other platforms. Thanks again for listening and watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.